seconds.
Hello, everybody. How are we doing? Just a few hours after the Belgian Grand Prix, and it was quite a dramatic one to lead us into the summer break. Less so on track. There were a few bits and pieces we're going to get through, but the main talking point has come after the race, which we'll dive into straight away. But first and foremost, we are joined by Mr. Pulse himself. How you doing, mate?
Hello. How you doing? I'm good. I am boiling in here, but I'm doing very well. Yeah, yourself?
All good, all good. I feel like it was one of those things. We were having a little chat. We were getting ready for the post-race, and then this news dropped. So let's go through the race result as it stands. George Russell taking a victory for Mercedes. 3 wins in 4 races for Mercedes. Loads of positives. And it will remain probably a Mercedes win, just with the other driver, because Lewis Hamilton in 2nd spot for now. Oscar Piastri 3rd. Charles Leclerc finished just outside the podium places in 4th. He might inherit a trophy. Very Carlos Sainz of Charles Leclerc. I remember Sainz picking up loads of trophies like after the fact. Charles Leclerc might be getting one in the post. Max Verstappen finished 5th. Lando Norris 6th. Carlos Sainz in 7th. Sergio Perez in 8th. Rounding out the top 4 teams. Then very much beyond that, Fernando Alonso 9th place. Esteban Ocon 10th to round up the point scoring places. Ricciardo, Stroll, Albon, Gasly, Magnussen, Bottas, Tsunoda, Sargent and Hulkenberg all finish, with Zhou Guanyu being the only retirement from the race. Having said all that, let's talk about why that might not be the case anymore. So, George Russell, after the race, and I've got the FIA's technical directives here. After the race, car number 63 was weighed at a weight of 798.0 kilograms, which is exactly the minimum weight requirement, which I think kind of raised some suspicion. You know, when the car is bang on to the 0.1 of a kilogram exactly on the weight required. They then realized that the car was not fully drained of fuel. There were 2.8 liters of fuel remaining in the car, which are supposed to be drained before the weight of the car is taken. They then asked the team to come back and fully drain the car properly, which they did according to the procedures given to them by the FIA. And the car was weighed again by the FIA on the inside and outside scales. So it's interesting that they weighed it twice just to make sure. And the weight of the car was 796.5 kilograms, which is 1.5 kilograms under the weight limit. A lot of technical jargon there to say George Russell's car was under the weight limit, and that is usually a slam dunk disqualification.
Yeah, sadly. I mean, it's so close, isn't it? It's like 1.5 kilos. Like, that's nothing. That sounds like absolutely nothing. It's what, 3 bags of 500 grams of sugar, obviously. But ultimately, if he's 1.5 kilos under for the entire race, where he should be, that does equate to about 2 or 3 seconds over a race distance. And what was his winning margin?
Yeah, he was less than half a second to Hamilton
and 1.5, I think it was, to Piastri. So, you know, that 2 or 3 seconds coincidentally added up to he should have finished in 3rd if that would have been the case. Obviously, there's a lot of mitigating factors, but it's a slam dunk disqualification, or it should be based on previous results.
Yeah,
sadly.
And like, it's not uncommon to see these kind of things in Formula One. It's usually not the race winner, has to be said. Like, I'm thinking of Lewis Hamilton and Charles Leclerc in Austin, where the car was too low to the ground. Thinking Sebastian Vettel in Hungary, where he finished in 2nd, but didn't have enough fuel in the car. Like, these things do happen in Formula One. And it's just a real shame for George Russell, because I was all ready to sing his praises. He had a phenomenal race, and obviously he can't really be blamed too much for that. Like, as George Russell, he doesn't put the car together. He doesn't weigh the car before the race. He is just behind the steering wheel. Let's talk about the positives first for George Russell, because it seemed like an insane strategy choice. Literally everybody has said, Christian Horner, Fred Vasseur, they were like, don't know why Mercedes even bothered to try and do that, but it was perfect. It worked amazingly. George Russell taking 34-lap-old hard tyres to a victory. Just Well, you were watching the race. Did you expect that to work as well? Because I didn't.
No, not a chance. I thought it was a bold strategy, and about 5 laps from the end, he was going to reach the cliff, and then just that's it. He's done. I know some people have said that the 1.5 kilos could have been because of tire wear, because he was doing a one stop and plank wear, and he didn't get to do the reconnaissance lap after the race because he goes straight through the pit lane. Tire pickup doesn't equal 1.5 kilos, so it wasn't that. It would just be a little thing. But for George, that was an incredible race. Like, that was the race of his life, and it would have been his first fully earned race win of the year, given he didn't really earn Austria. He was handed it. So yeah, it's gutting. It's absolutely gutting. George did incredible. Mercedes are on the rise. Yeah, it's fair to say. I think a lot of people thought that with the technical directive that was introduced this weekend, they thought, oh, Mercedes, McLaren, Ferrari, they're going to be hampered. They're handing it back to Red Bull. Red Bull weren't anywhere near as good as those 3 teams today.
Yeah.
That's a Red Bull circuit. This was Red Bull's biggest circuit, and Mercedes got a 1-2. Like, George is going to be disqualified, but he earned first place, and Hamilton earned second place. It was a Mercedes 1-2. Only one of them is going to get to enjoy it, but it was a Mercedes 1-2 today.
I think the incredible thing that we've kind of got now, and you kind of pointed towards it there, is it is a proper top 4 team battle. It does feel like the interchange between those 4 teams, they're all so closely matched that it wasn't particularly pace as much that won George Russell this race. It was just that wild card strategy, that ability to adapt to a race as it was playing out. You know, he realized that the medium tire was falling away a lot quicker. The hard compound tire seemed to be just a little bit better than the rest. And nobody really realized that distinction between the medium and hard compound tire and was expecting that difference. That's something that you get as the driver in the car. You get that feeling and you're like, actually, these tires are holding on a lot better than I thought they were going to, and that we predicted. Let's gamble it. Let's go for it. Because George was running outside the podium places. He was, you know, moving around. I think he'd just overtaken Sergio Perez, which was another massive turning point. Just talking about that, it was, you know, him getting in front of Sergio Perez instead of falling behind Max Verstappen, which it did feel like he was going to through that middle part of the race. Like, not one team expected that tire deg difference. And that was one of those things. I think George Russell in recent years has been one of those drivers that does like a gamble. He does like a strategy call from inside the cockpit.
He did that a lot. Last year, there was a couple of 2-stop races where he actually did the 1-stop. Sometimes it worked, and then a lot of the times it didn't. But those occasions where it worked, he looked like a genius, and he looked like a genius again today. I know some people are upset online because one driver did a 1-stop and one did a 2, but it was that driver doing the 1-stop who chose to do the 1-stop, not the team.
Yes.
So that's where that big difference is. George drove his heart out, and he's going to get nothing for it.
That is the other thing, isn't it? It's so heartbreaking, and obviously George will be the most heartbroken of anybody, but it's just such a difficult pill to swallow for him, definitely, because he deserved it. As I said, he drove incredibly. He did those right things at the right time. Like that move on Sergio Perez, that was the biggest thing I kind of highlighted in the race. Getting past Sergio Perez at that point, when it felt like Max Verstappen was kind of bearing down on him. And you never want Max Verstappen in your rearview mirrors. No. When George Russell was able to kind of get past the first Red Bull, get himself away from Verstappen, that then turned from, he's running in 4th place, he might end up or finish in 4th or 5th, to then the Mercedes team realizing, well, if we're going to finish 4th or 5th, let's just gamble for it. Let's just go for something different. And that was the one thing that was absolutely amazing.
And also, like, Russell did it, but I don't think a lot of others could have done that 1-stop also. You know, a lot of people on their hard tires did have a decent amount of degradation. and were dropping off. I mean, Russell was dropping off. Obviously, he was like 8 tenths a lap slower than Lewis, and even slower still than Piastri, who again was brilliant, but we'll talk about that later. But you know, other teams, a couple of teams considered it, but like you said, nobody thought that you could do it, and that's because they had more drop off still than George did on his. Which again goes to highlight how brilliant Mercedes have done on their car, because at the start of the year, Mercedes were very hard on their tires, and they were harder than Ferrari, who were brilliant on their tires at the beginning of the year. And now Mercedes have actually gotten over a lot of their issues since they brought that upgrade a few races ago. And since then, they've now gotten better than Ferrari on their tire wear. McLaren also have done the same thing. So, you know, Mercedes have done an incredible job to be in a position where they could actually do a one-stop as well. So, yeah, it's incredible from them, really.
Yeah. Yeah, and as we mentioned, like, even though George Russell is likely to be disqualified, I think probably by now, I haven't double-checked the FIA website, but I imagine that's probably come through because it's been a couple of hours since that kind of news dropped. It just feels like, even though they deserve that 1-2, they've still got the victory in Lewis Hamilton. That is still 3 out of the last 4 races that they have won. And, you know, everybody's talking about, you know, Red Bull being top of the championship, the McLaren being the best car. Like, you know, McLaren have taken over the mantle of being the best car on the Formula One grid. Mercedes have taken 3 out of the 4 wins. Like, nobody's really saying.
Nobody's even talking about it, really. They're all talking about McLaren and Verstappen, and yet Mercedes is the one that's cleaning up wins. It's such a shame that they started so poorly, because they actually could have, if they didn't start so poorly, be in a position to fight McLaren and Red Bull, and we could have a 3-way fight for the Constructors' Championship, because as much as I love Ferrari, they've bottled it once again. So, you know, it's a shame they're so far behind, but it sets us up now, this second half of the year. It's going to be must-watch, every single race, because it's not just one person's going to win. Every single race now is going to be like a different team, a different driver on top. Mercedes have just maximized their opportunities, really. And that 2 races now they shouldn't have won, but they've won. They shouldn't have won today, and they shouldn't have won in Austria, and they've won both of them, because they're maximizing their opportunities that other people are not doing at the moment.
And I think that's always been the Mercedes, like, ever since that drop off post 2022, the regulation change. I think that has been the one core thing they've still held on to as a team. I always kind of think of, like, what is the fundamental feeling around a team? And for Red Bull, it was like that sort of robotic efficiency that they have. With McLaren, it's always kind of the nearly effect. They're very much the underdog, I feel like, all the time. With Mercedes, it is that damage limitations. They're always so good at just being like, okay, we can get 4th and 5th in this race, and we will get 4th and 5th. Like, they always seem to get what you expect them to get, which is not the case for everybody in Formula One. Like, a lot of teams ebb and flow throughout the season, but you kind of...
There was a few races in 22 and 23 for Mercedes as well, where they should not have been where they were. I think of Zandvoort in 22. Mercedes could have won that if not for a somewhat well-timed safety car with one of the V-car AlphaTauris breaking down at a convenient time. So, you know, they do maximize their opportunities. They've made a lot of mistakes. Every team has, especially a red one. But Mercedes have, in general, limited their mistakes even when pace hasn't been as good. And that is one thing they are so good at, and that is why they dominated 14 to 20, and even 21. You know, they still won the teams championship that year because they are such a good team.
Yeah, just absolutely. And even last year, they finished 2nd in the constructor standings when they were nowhere near the 2nd best car throughout the season, in my opinion.
3rd or 4th. There was like 3 races where they were 2nd fastest, but ultimately McLaren and Ferrari at the back end of 23 were faster, and they couldn't do anything about it. Mercedes still finished 2nd somehow.
And like, even though they've started the season fifth fastest, really. They kind of started behind Aston Martin, you could argue, in Bahrain, Saudi Arabia, those kind of races at the beginning of the year. I genuinely could see them like closing that gap a little bit. They're starting to close in. It is a very long way. Don't get me wrong. It is a very long way. Like Red Bull now 404 points, McLaren 361, Ferrari 340, Mercedes still in the 200s with 284. Obviously, take 25 away from that and hand a few more points to the rest of the teams because George Russell's disqualification has now been confirmed. Oh yeah, the chat. Thank you, chat, helping us out. Mercedes disqualification looks like it's official on the Formula One website and Twitter. Done and dusted. Disqualified for being 1.5 kilograms underweight. So yeah, that 25 points, take that away. But still 10 races to go. At least Ferrari, they could definitely catch. Maybe not the Red Bulls and McLarens. And if Mercedes finish the season third in the Constructors' Championship, it's a massive, massive sight on like how good they've managed to be at just picking up those points throughout the year, which does then lead me on to Lewis Hamilton. I was going to talk about Lewis Hamilton as being frustrated and annoyed, but he now obviously picks up that win, not in the way that he would have wanted to. I feel like he would still look at this Grand Prix and there's still some difficulties for Lewis Hamilton to accept in all of this, because he managed to get himself into the lead, got that overtake done on Charles Leclerc, did really well to extend that lead away from the pack, and then just found himself behind his teammate. He was clearly frustrated. Like, the team split the strategy. You could say that Lewis Hamilton actually went for the optimal strategy in terms of what everyone expected, but it would have been very awkward for Lewis Hamilton to find himself behind George Russell, knocking on the door, but not able to actually get past in those last 5 laps.
Yeah, that's going to be very frustrating for him. He had faster tyres. He was almost a second a lap faster. In terms of like delta to overtake at Spa, what was it? Half a second, something like that? If you're within
0.5, 0.6, something
like that. Something like that, then you could overtake. And he was 0.8 of a second per lap faster. Yeah, that's going to sting because he just couldn't get a good exit out of La Source. Russell on 31 lap old tyres was getting a better exit out of a very tight, very slow hairpin, which is a complete and utter traction zone.
Yeah.
And yet Hamilton wasn't getting as good of an exit. So that's going to frustrate him. Still got his 105th win, which I'm sure he's very happy with anyway. But there is frustrations, definitely, that, you know, it was a win that slipped away, even though he's grabbed it. So yeah, I don't know. It's a weird one. It's a very, very strange one. That one. Should have won, didn't, and then did.
It's gonna be a difficult like Twitter arrangement for Mercedes, because obviously they're gonna have to put out a Twitter post saying George Russell loses the race, but obviously Hamilton then also wins the race. So it's interesting to see how the Mercedes team kind of play that off with both of their drivers being involved in that. And I did feel like it kind of gave me a little bit of a feeling of like, in years gone by, George Russell is a very different prospect to Valtteri Bottas, say, who was Lewis Hamilton's previous teammate. It did give me that kind of feeling. And I know it's slightly different because the Mercedes team aren't battling for championships or anything like that. It's not like Lewis Hamilton is at the top of the standings and needed that extra 7 points to like guarantee a win, blah, 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 blah. But if it was Valtteri Bottas in front of Lewis Hamilton, do you think the team would have just said, Valtteri, you've got your second place finish. Lewis Hamilton's faster. You know, as you said, he was nearly a second a lap quicker. Would they have just nudged Valtteri Bottas to the side, or even George Russell? Maybe if Lewis Hamilton was staying on with the team.
If Hamilton was staying with Mercedes, I think they would have asked George to concede position to Hamilton. It's very difficult to tell your driver that's staying at the team, by the way, we want the driver that's leaving. He's right behind you. Just let him by. Just let him by. Do it. Do the right thing. You know, they're not fighting for a championship, so that's another thing. Constructors' championships, I'd argue they're not as important as they used to be.
Okay.
I know you do get more prize money, so that's a big thing. But with the cost cap and everything, most teams are now operating on a profit, not a loss. So Constructors' Championship points aren't as important as they once were. Bottas probably would have been told to get out of Hamilton's way, and Bottas wouldn't have gotten out of Hamilton's way. It's the teammate who was. He was in that role. He knew his role, and he played it to perfection, apart from 21. So, he played that role perfectly, and I think he would have given up a win. He pretty much did, I think, a couple of times. Obviously, I know they were fighting for championships, so it's a bit different. So, I think he would have. Would Russell, even if Hamilton was staying on at the team, have obliged? I don't think he's like Norris in that sense.
Yeah.
He would have fought it. I know Norris fought it very hard, but I don't think Russell would have. Hamilton wouldn't have given up a win to Russell. I'll put it that way.
No.
Not a hope in hell.
No.
He'd have said the same thing he said when Rosberg was his teammate, which was, if he gets close, he can try and overtake, and I won't fight him.
Yeah.
So
he can give it a go.
I think he would have done that. But that's the racer he is. That's the sort of driver you want. You don't really want him to give up wins. But no, I don't think Bottas would have won the race if he was still his teammate. I think he would have conceded the position.
I think that's the thing, isn't it? That's the kind of closest comparison I could think about. Or you could say the same for, like, if Sergio Perez was leading in front of Verstappen, that would definitely be the case. You know what I mean? Like, it is the case that Mercedes less so now, but previously did have that 1-2 relationship. Red Bull definitely have that now. It is interesting that a lot of teams are getting, or kind of moving away from that 1-2 relationship a lot of the time. Like, I don't think Leclerc would have moved out of the way for Sainz, nor Sainz for Leclerc. I don't think that now Norris would move out of the way for Piastri. I think that was like a one-off, you know what I mean? It was Piastri's first win. It was the team that kind of gave him the position, and not actually the fact that Lando Norris kind of earned that position, if that makes sense. They did it for strategy reasons rather than racing reasons. I feel like now that wouldn't be the case. And then even kind of going down the order, there's a lot of relationships. Ocon, Gasly being the one that jumps to mind straight away.
Yeah, well, would they do it?
Exactly.
No, they'll fire the other driver into the wall and take the win.
Like, it does feel like it's nice that we actually get to see quite a bit of racing between teammates a lot of the time now. And I feel like that is one thing that Formula One does need as we move forwards. Although I feel like if we would have seen 2 race wins in a row given to drivers because of team orders, there might be some people that were slightly frustrated about that, because, well, Oscar Piastri, to be fair, may have ended up winning this race of his own accord. He was really, really quick. Let's talk about him. Finished in 3rd on the road. That'll be promoted to 2nd, and looks the better McLaren driver this weekend. Just really, after getting that win in Hungary, maybe he's just that little bit more motivated, pushing himself that little bit more, and just looks so quick.
Yeah, Norris is going to regret letting Piastri win in Budapest. I said it at the time, and a lot of people said I was an idiot. I think I'm not an idiot right now. It's looking a lot more like, you give a driver a win, and it can give them so much confidence. I think of the Hamilton-Rosberg in 2015. Hamilton dominated the championship.
Yep.
And then he literally just let off for the last 4 races, was it? Rosberg won all 4 or 5 races, and then started 2016 as he ended 2015, and ultimately only just won the championship. But it was that giving him the momentum at the end of 15 that helped Rosberg to win in 16. And it could be something like that now with Piastri, because Piastri, for the last year and a half that he's been in F1, fantastic qualifier, amazing qualifier over 1 lap. Soon as the race started, they're on full tanks of fuel. In the sprint race, he was also good because he doesn't need to manage anything. But in a Grand Prix, full tanks of fuel. By the end of the first stint, he's lapping a lot slower than his teammate.
Yeah.
Most times. Hungary was definitely a turning point where he maintained the pace to Norris. I fully expected Piastri to lose pace to Norris as the race went on. Didn't really happen. All right, the final stint maybe was in Norris's favor, but Piastri held on for a lot longer than he has in previous races, and that, I think, has really given him that sense that he can do it.
Yeah.
Because I do get quite nervous vibes from Piastri. He's a lot more. He's a lot quieter than a lot of other drivers.
Yeah.
He doesn't get angry somehow. I don't know how he doesn't get angry. Especially with some of the things he has to do.
Yeah, he's got a very cool, calm head, which I think, to be fair, at this point in McLaren's life cycle, they really need. Because Lando Norris is not that. It's like Piastri, almost the fact that Piastri is so nice and so kind of respectful, and maybe, at least what we hear on the radio, I assume that also then runs into his personality off track as well. I feel like he is the kind of driver that they really need, because they have made lots of mistakes in the last few races. We said it earlier on. They've looked like the second fastest team, if not the fastest team, since Imola.
Yeah.
And they've only won one race to Mercedes winning 3. And Ferrari have even won a race in that time. And Ferrari have been nowhere near the fastest car on the track. So when you're looking at it, if you look Imola onwards, McLaren have only matched Ferrari in terms of race victories.
Yeah. They're operationally, they are still behind. I think if operationally they were in a better position, I still think Norris would have won in Budapest, because they would have told Piastri is what it is. Sorry, this is us fighting for both championships. But they are going to get there. It's one of those things. It's not the McLaren of old. McLaren's got an incredible history.
Yes.
But it's not the same team as it was 20 years ago, when you had Raikkonen, Hakkinen, Coulthard, whatever, fighting Schumacher. It's nothing like that. They're not in that same team anymore. And that they're learning. They're learning what it's like to be at the front again. They're getting there, but it's going to take a bit more time. Operationally, like I said, that's their main weakness at the minute. Car, incredible. 2 drivers, brilliant. One of them can't get it off the line, but 2 drivers that are brilliant. It's just operationally, they're not quite there yet. They're not where Mercedes are, since we were talking about Mercedes about 10 minutes ago, how amazing they are operationally, how they can maximize everything. McLaren's not there. They will get there, though, I believe.
Oh, yeah, I completely agree. And I think that is the point. Before we get to Lando Norris, I'll loop back to, because I interrupted you while you were talking about Piastri, but I think Piastri was that kind of, he was hovering around Leclerc, then got that move. And as you say, I think the confidence that he's gained in this first half of the season, particularly last time in Hungary, as you mentioned, then gave him that opportunity to say, no, I'm going to go a little bit longer. I'm going to, do the tyres how I want to do them. And then you got into the point where he got onto that final stint and he was just lightning quick. Like, he was, 9 seconds off George Russell when he came out of the pits, around about that 9-10 seconds off.
Yeah.
And then, he finishes the race 1.1 seconds off the lead. It's just like so quick in that final stint. And well, the one thing I was going to mention is finished 1.1 seconds off the lead. He did lose that 1.1 seconds in the pit stop. Is that, again, just a little bit of naivety from Oscar Piastri? It wasn't a massive thing. Well, unless you're the front jack guy, in which case you've got some bruised ribs. He came in just so hot. I think that was like in his head, he kind of knew he was on for something a little bit special if he could get the last stint right. And therefore just came in a bit hot. If you haven't seen it, basically came into the pits, just was like a foot maybe too far, came to a stop, smashed into the front jack guy. Luckily, he still managed to get the car up in the air. Like, they're so professional, those pit stop guys. The whole pit stop kind of moves a foot to the right-hand side, takes the tyres off, and it was a 4.4 second stop where it might have been 2.4, 2.5, and then that's your second, isn't it? Yeah. It's your 2 seconds that you're gaining.
He sent him to Narnia with that one. It was a big hit, and do you know what? It was a big hit, but like you said, it was still a 4.4 second stop.
Which is just insane, isn't it?
Brilliant stop. They were able to go, because it's say it's that far, they're able to move themselves over there within a second and still do the pit stop. And that's 20 odd people doing that, and it only added 1 second.
Yeah.
Incredible. Well, 2 seconds. But still, it's a brilliant performance by them. It's a shame that happened, because like you said, could have cost him a position. I don't know about that, but
yeah,
it was a shame. I think if the race was 2 or 3 laps longer, Piastri could have won that race.
Ooh. I was thinking, like, if it was one more, it was a bit like in Imola, where it's like, if it was a lap longer,
Yeah.
it would have played in our
1
favor.
lap
But,
longer. Yeah.
like, obviously, it's never going to be a lap longer. But it would have been really interesting, actually, if Russell was still holding on to the lead, Hamilton had gone for a move, and Piastri was within touching distance. Like, we could have easily seen like 3 cars going down to La Source. That would have been insane for a final lap of the race to see 3 cars all gunning for it. But
yeah, or
wasn't
into
quite meant
Lake
to be.
Como at the top of the hill.
Yeah.
Just, that would have been so good.
Maybe next year. Maybe next
Maybe
year.
next, yes.
Although I did think on that, just before we move on to Norris, I did think that, actually, I mentioned it with Verstappen. I was going to mention the DRS detection zone, but I think that's more of a Red Bull thing. Let's talk about Norris, because you mentioned it beforehand. He just cannot get the race start right. And I gave him the benefit of the doubt. You know, like, as a McLaren fan, I was like, okay, it's his first couple of times starting on pole. He's worried about Verstappen to the right-hand side of him. I can understand him moving that way in Spain. But now it's becoming a real problem. Like, it's becoming every single time he starts a race, he is losing positions on the first lap, within the first corner a lot of the time.
Yeah, the Mark Webber effect.
Exactly. And this time around, obviously started in 4th place, went way too deep into turn 1, ended up in the gravel, or at least dipping a couple of tyres into the gravel, and then he comes out of turn 5 in 7th. And it's like, they are 3 really pivotal places that you have lost when, as we discussed right at the beginning, the top 8 drivers, maybe 7 without Perez, the top 7 drivers are all so close to one another right now in terms of their ability and race pace and everything that they've got. You just can't lose 3 positions in the first 2 seconds of a race.
Is a difference between Norris and Verstappen. At the end of lap 1, Verstappen was up 3 places, Norris was down 3 places.
And it was, the fact that they then converged as well was the thing, wasn't it?
Yeah, they literally converged after like 2 laps. Norris needs to get it off the line better. He needs to. I don't even know what he was doing at La Source. He had so much space that he didn't need to run it as wide as he did. There was like half a car's width between him and Piastri, if I remember rightly. So, he didn't need to do that. I'm sure he didn't mean to do it, but he didn't need to do that. And that is going to be costing him a lot. A few races ago, it was like, oh, he could possibly be fighting Max Verstappen for a world championship. He ain't there yet. He ain't there yet. Even with the fastest car, he ain't there yet. Just because of stuff like that. It's getting harder to overtake in F1 again, not easier, because the cars are getting more developed. They're getting closer together, which actually makes overtakes harder, not easier. And you cannot be losing positions at the start of a race. Even at a track like Spa, where it's historically quite easy to overtake, wasn't the case today, for reasons we're going to talk about shortly. And you cannot be losing places. Yeah. Cannot.
That was the thing. Like, going into the race, and maybe, as a McLaren fan, I was seeing Max Verstappen starting in 11th place. I was looking at a Ferrari in front. I was going, okay, this is a real opportunity for Lando Norris to properly win a race. He's been complaining about it. He's been complaining about things not going in his way. He's been complaining about obviously having to give that position to Piastri. This was an opportunity for him, I think, starting from 4th place with the cars that were in front of him, to really show, okay, the McLaren is the fastest car. I'm going to prove that today, and I'm going to win this race. And instead, drops back to 7th. And then, I was looking at Max Verstappen in 11th place, being miles off the McLarens. He's then right next to him again, and left finishing behind Max Verstappen in the overall order in the end. Verstappen coming home in 5th place. That's going to come 4th. And Lando Norris coming home in 6th behind him. And then that's going to come 5th. So he still loses a couple of points to Max Verstappen again in the championship. And it's just like, as you said, I don't think Lando Norris is quite there yet. I don't think the McLaren team are quite there yet. To be able to really fight every single weekend at the pinnacle right at the front.
Yeah, no, I agree. Because also Norris finished behind Verstappen because of a late first stop.
Yes, that was
They
so
left him out a few
strange.
laps at a circuit, which always has a massive undercut because of the size of the circuit. Um, yeah, that doesn't help either. The team, yeah, like you said, are not quite there yet.
That is so strange that you mentioned that, and obviously the fact that the undercut is so ridiculous here. But we saw Nico Hulkenberg come in on like lap 5 or whatever it was to try and get an undercut in the midfield. So the fact that they left Lando Norris out until lap 14, and then they didn't leave him out in the second stint, like it's so. And I'd like. Do you think McLaren, in terms of their way of looking at pit stops, I always feel like they're just a bit too reactionary. You know what I mean? Like they always just copy somebody else. Like even in Silverstone, they had the medium tires there, but because Hamilton went onto the softs, they went onto the softs. And it felt like today they were like, oh well, Max Verstappen's going to pit, so we better pit. And it was just like they don't actually follow their own strategy as much as they just react to others.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Yeah, Silverstone saying to Norris, if we put if we put softs on, we're racing Hamilton. If we put mediums on, we're racing Verstappen. And you're like, well, obviously he's going to say Hamilton because he's bloody racing Hamilton at the time. He's not even racing Verstappen. Verstappen's 10 seconds down the road. You're like, what are you on about, bro? We don't care about him. He's out of it. And then ultimately Verstappen actually beat him because they decided to do what was a very poor choice. And then, yeah, Hungary again. Like, Hungary, what was it? They boxed Norris because he had 5 seconds over Hamilton. You could have left him out another lap and boxed Piastri, and you would have avoided all of this issue.
Yeah.
And Norris would have still been ahead of Hamilton.
Yeah.
And
even
so,
then, you could have like got away with letting them race as well. I always thought at that point, like then if Norris is just quicker in that final stint, catches up to the back of Piastri, is so much faster. Yeah, Norris probably goes on to win that race because he is that much quicker, and you can let them race, like we saw with the Mercedes cars today. You can, the racers that you've got at the front of the field should be good enough that you can trust them not to smash into each other. Like, yeah, I mean, I know they do every now and then.
Piastri and Norris as well. Yeah. Like, two very competent drivers. Piastri is really good. His awareness around him is very, very good for someone who's only in his second season. Like, I can only really think of a couple of instances last year where it was an issue, but again, that was his first season. This year, I don't really think of many instances where he's gotten involved in incidents I didn't need to get involved in. Like, he's in general being very, very clean. So
I think he is.
They can let him race.
Yeah. On that note, I think Piastri is the only driver now to have finished every single lap. So that's what you're kind of looking at. You're looking at a driver who doesn't get involved in incidents. He doesn't put himself in the barriers. He doesn't have technical issues because he looks after his car quite well. It's just he is starting to look like an all-round driver. And now has got that bit of confidence as well. And now is starting to, really click. I'm very, very excited to see where Piastri goes. I think there's a lot of interesting twos and fros between Piastri and Norris to come. But I am still very excited to see where Piastri can kind of end up.
There's a whole Twitter meltdown coming your way with being a McLaren fan if they carry on like this.
There's going to be, people choosing sides. You're either a Piastri fan or a Norris fan. There's going to be a cutting point at one point. It's got that. I know Rosberg Hamilton is always the one, isn't it? Like the comparison, just because that was for championships as well, and it was most recently. But it does have that feel to it, doesn't it? Where it's gonna come to a head at some point. It's gonna be something that happens. Hopefully not as dramatic as it was in Spain between Hamilton and Rosberg, but we'll have to wait and see.
No, it shouldn't be that bad. It shouldn't.
I'm just going to reiterate some of those guys in the chat that have just joined us. We did talk about it right at the start, but George Russell has indeed been disqualified. A few people asking about it. I'll just go through it again before we move on to Max Verstappen and Red Bull. And Sergio Perez, who I really want to get your opinion on. So start thinking about that answer now. But George Russell has been disqualified from the Grand Prix. Car number 63 was weighed at a weight of 798 kilograms, which is exactly the weight limit. So they kind of looked into that a little bit further. They realized that the fuel hadn't been fully drained out of the car, and there were still 2.8 liters of fuel inside of George Russell's car when it should be completely empty when it is weighed. They therefore asked the team to fully drain the car once again. Once the team had done that, they weighed the car inside and outside on the scales at the Spa circuit. It came in at 796.5 kilograms, which is 1.5 kilograms below the minimum weight limit and is just a slam dunk penalty, which does move everybody one place up in the standings, which actually does play into Red Bull's favour and RB's favour, which we'll get to a little bit later on. But let's start with Red Bull. Max Verstappen, he took a penalty once again. 2022, got pole position, took a penalty, won the race. 2023, got pole position, took a penalty, won the race. At least this year, got pole position, took the 10th place penalty, only managed to finish in 4th. So that, if anything, that's a sign that we're finally getting a more competitive Formula One field. Max Verstappen wasn't able to just saunter through 10 cars in front of him and take an easy Grand Prix victory. It was a long way to come for Max Verstappen, wasn't it? Starting in 11th place, he was up into 8th within the first 3 or 4 laps, though. Like, he dispatched the midfield cars fairly swiftly, but then once you hit into the Ferraris, the McLarens, it did get a little bit trickier.
Yeah. Once again, we got to see a big difference between Formula 1 and Formula 1.5. Yeah. It's only the difference is now Formula 1 is actually a few teams, not just Max Verstappen. But it was incredible how quickly he dispatched those midfield drivers. And then he hit a wall. Like, he literally hit a wall. He didn't get past any cars, I don't think, on track after that. It shows, again, how close the field is now. There is no field spread. And it's showing just how unbelievable it's going to be next year. Next year is going to be the season of all seasons. Like, it's going to be so good. I can't wait for next year for the championship fight, because I genuinely think we could have 3 teams in it, and Ferrari will do Ferrari things. It's going to be so much fun. With Verstappen, though, I think also it didn't help Max today that they did shorten the DRS zone, which is a big thing. Also, they did opt to run higher downforce than their rivals because they needed pole position, because they were going back 10 places. I think if Max wasn't taking a 10-place penalty, he wasn't running as much downforce as he was. He'd have been running the same downforce as the people around him. And he'd have probably won the race. Because, this is a Red Bull track. Like, if you think of a perfect circuit for Red Bull racing, it is Spa-Francorchamps. It's also Suzuka. And, they dominated Suzuka, but they didn't dominate Spa. And this was their perfect circuit. Red Bull's in for a world of hurt at the next couple of races. Just an FYI.
They got, it's kind of that. Well, we know Monaco. Singapore coming up as well. That was the one last year, wasn't it, that really stood out. But as you say, a couple of more European races that fall towards that slightly trickier circuit for Red Bull to properly balance the car within. And even with the upgrades in Hungary, still looking like they're not quite where they want to be with this car this year.
No, didn't do anything. Zandvoort coming up is going to be not a fun race for Verstappen, I don't think. It's not going to be like it was in the last couple of years, I think, for Max. Monza, you have to ride curbs in Monza to get any lap time. That car is awful over high curbs, and Monza, for some reason, have high curbs everywhere. Singapore, like you said, standout last year. Going to be a brutal race for them probably this year. But anyway, Verstappen this year, Spa, didn't win. Let's get back to that.
Yeah. I mean, Max said himself he didn't feel too bad about the result. It was kind of, I think, where he expected to get to, considering he was starting in 11th, had to take that penalty at some point during the season, so decided to just take it the same place he has the previous 2 seasons. Makes sense, as you say, with it being such a big Red Bull track. But yeah, shortening that DRS zone. And I did want to get your thoughts and feelings on that, because you obviously do your predictions videos before the race, and you kind of talked about that a touch in there as well, and the fact that shortening that DRS zone, did it kill a little bit of the overtaking that we have? Obviously, last year it maybe felt a little bit too easy, which is why they did it. Is there next year going to be like, instead of shorten it by 75 meters, maybe shorten it by 40 meters? Like, just make it that. Is there like a nice sweet spot that they're looking for?
Yeah, it's a weird thing, DRS. They've had it now for 13 years, and they still don't know how to perfect DRS, which is probably why they're getting rid of it in 26. Is how it is. You know, I think shortening it. I mean, in my video, preview and predictions video, I literally said you could do away with it, just get rid of it. You don't need it at that Camel Straight, and I still stand by the fact you don't need DRS down the Camel Straight, because a lot of the overtakes that happened at Camel today happened about halfway down the straight, or even happened before it, because you get such a good slingshot from Radeon to get those overtakes if you're in the slipstream. What they're probably going to do next year, I reckon, is they'll increase it by about half of what they've decreased it by for next year. I think that might actually be a sweet spot, especially because the cars are going to be even harder to overtake with next year. Yes. Overtaking is going to be even more difficult because it is just how F1 is. The more developed the cars get, the harder it gets to overtake. And next year, there's going to be at the peak of where they're ever going to be with these ground effect cars, because it's the last year of it. So they're probably going to increase the DRS zone a little bit. Was it too short today? We still saw a lot of overtakes. We didn't see as many as we've seen in the past, but all the overtakes were still done at that same spot. And we did see plenty of them. Hulkenberg did a few. Ocon, Gasly, Alpine were overtaking a lot of people, despite the fact they didn't really finish very well. So there was still, a good amount of overtakes. It's just at the front, we got a DRS train between the top 8 cars, which was cool at first. But then they didn't really do anything because they're in a DRS train.
Yeah. It was like, oh, they're all so close to one another. They're all a bit too close to one another. Maybe a little bit of separation here and there would have played into their favor. Yeah, I think you're right. There's definitely a sweet spot to come. Although Max Verstappen, no wins in the last 4 races. Not something that we saw last year, even close to seeing last year. So be interesting to see, as you say, Zandvoort not looking like a great track for them, Monza not looking like a great track for them. Verstappen might be even more frustrated than we saw at Hungary in the next couple of Grand Prix. But I do think we need to talk about his teammate moving into after the summer break, because you say Zandvoort is not going to be good for Max Verstappen. Will Sergio Perez even be there? Is the real question. Is started in P2 today, ended P8, which, let's face it, is effectively last. Like, as you say, like,
it's brutal. It's a top team. They are still leading the championship, and your driver that you needed to perform started second, got bullied by Hamilton in the Mercedes, and then had shocking pace. Tyre wear was atrocious. Yeah, it's not a good look for Sergio, is it?
Are there any positives you can find? Just one.
I've got career positives for Perez. I actually put on here, I think Perez overachieved in his career, which a lot of people are going to be like, what are you even talking about? Dude's been doing awful. No, I think he overachieved for his career, but his Red Bull tenure's at an end. It's a brutal end. It wasn't good enough once again for Sergio. Did a great lap in qualifying at least, which is more than can be said for his last few weekends.
Yes,
but it fell apart in the race, didn't it? It was not a good race for him.
Yeah, I think it's that same thing, like what I said with Lando Norris, like starting 4th to Max Verstappen 11th, the fact that they then converged, starting 2nd and Max Verstappen starting 11th, and you're in identical machinery, and Max Verstappen then completely overtakes you, like just disappears up the road. And I know that Sergio Perez then pitted right at the end, but even if you take that 18 seconds off, because he pitted for the fastest lap, he's still miles adrift of the rest. Obviously got overtaken by Carlos Sainz in the final stint as well, like consolidating him as 8th place in those 8 drivers. And it was just like, it was difficult to watch. It was really hard to watch for Sergio Perez because it just felt like he was driving backwards throughout the 44 laps. And luckily, as you say, the top 4 teams are so far ahead of the rest of the pack. We do have that kind of Formula 1, Formula 1.5. Luckily, Fernando Alonso is still miles backwards, but there's not really much comfort you can take in Fernando Alonso finishing behind you in an Aston Martin anymore, because that's just where they should be. I know that Christian Horner, after the race, said we need both cars scoring. And then when he was asked about McLaren gaining on them once again in terms of championship points, he said we need to stop that. So not positive quotes moving forwards for Sergio Perez. And Sergio Perez even said himself, he's had enough of the speculation. He wants that to go away. But it's not going to go away, is it? It's not going to go away until he starts delivering out on track. Liam Lawson, Daniel Ricciardo, both in a test over the next couple of weekends. So they used the Red Bull filming day for a test with Lawson at Silverstone. They're now using RB's filming day for a test at Spa with Lawson, Ricciardo, and Tsunoda. Tsunoda is also there, but just doesn't feel like he's in the mix. It is as you said, is it the end for Sergio Perez? I think you're pretty hard and fast on your point of view on that.
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah, it is. Sorry, I should knock something. Yeah, it is. He is at the end of the road, isn't he? Who replaces him though? Will they be any better? Ricciardo. I'm not impressed by Ricciardo that much. I know a lot. He's got a lot of fans. I think Ricciardo. I know he's been given some crap strategies recently as well, which hasn't helped, but he's not been amazing. He's qualified well and still been beaten quite a bit by his teammate. Even when he's out-qualified him, it has happened a few times. You know, Tsunoda in general has been the more impressive driver of the two, but he's not getting the Red Bull seat. I have a feeling that might be because they do still view Tsunoda as a Honda driver, not a Red Bull driver. And obviously they're departing with Honda, which is a shame.
I think Christian Horner also, sorry, just on that, I think Christian Horner also just can't quite see past sort of Yuki Tsunoda's really difficult start in Formula One. Because there were a couple of seasons there where Yuki Tsunoda had a really tricky kind of bedding in period. And I think Christian Horner kind of still holds that over his head a little bit.
Yeah, I'm very surprised Tsunoda lasted as long as he did. Because the Red Bull, and that's no disrespect to Tsunoda, the Red Bull family, the machine that is Red Bull, is a savage machine. It's spat drivers out so quickly. And Tsunoda in 21, and for most of 22, was not doing that well, really. He stepped up in 23, but you could have argued that's just because he had Nick DeFree for a teammate. And this year, you know, he stepped up again and he's doing a lot better. So yeah, no, I agree. They probably also have that viewpoint. Liam Lawson, great driver, great prospect, but are they going to throw him in the deep end at Red Bull and derail his career before it gets underway at a vital point? Probably not. Isaac Hadjar in Formula 2, doing a wonderful job, being absolutely mecha-chromed by their engines, because Mechachrome can't build an engine to save their life for some reason. He's been the most unlucky driver in F2 this year, but he's still doing a wonderful job. He's towards the front of the field when he's not getting shafted. So he's a prospect as well, but they won't shove him in a Red Bull. They won't shove Lawson in a Red Bull. It's really only Ricciardo. I still don't think Ricciardo should be in the seat. Like, I don't know what the hell they're gonna do, but I don't think there's a winning solution for like a Red Bull partnership at the minute. It is just they're gonna have to rely on Max Verstappen. Put someone else in. Are you gonna get any better? You'll get a little bit better, but I don't know. I really don't know. That's my honest answer.
No, I think you're spot on. I also am not in the Ricciardo kind of train of thought, to be honest with you. I don't think Ricciardo, again, McLaren biases maybe come in a little bit because I had to just deal with him in that McLaren car being so far adrift of where we wanted him to be. But even since coming in with RB, I don't think he's done enough to prove that he is like out and out going to go into that seat, replace Sergio Perez and do way better.
Yeah.
I think actually what it comes down to for Red Bull is they have been so brutal on their drivers. It's just coming back to bite them. I feel like, for so many years they were chucking out Gasly, chucking out Albon, chucking out even De Vries after half a season. It was going to eventually come back around where you're like, oh, well, hang on, we haven't got any drivers left. And actually, if you look at it, would Albon do better than Sergio Perez? Yes. Like, if you could pick a driver from the back of the pack, I think Albon would do better than Perez right now. Obviously, they got rid of him a long time ago. He needed that time to progress at Williams. I understand that. But by chucking him out so early and not keeping him in even the sister team, they got rid of it. And same with Pierre Gasly, just the fact that they basically said to Gasly, you're never getting back into the Red Bull seat. So he had to leave. He had to go and find somewhere else. Like, he wasn't just going to sit in the second seat forever. So he went to Alpine, a team that wanted him, a team that is really built around Pierre Gasly. And Gasly now seems like their kind of core driver moving forwards. So they've thrown away so many good drivers over the years. It was going to come back to bite them. And I feel like it has. Like, they just haven't got a good option. The best option is Yuki Tsunoda, but it's just not going to happen.
No, it absolutely isn't. It is the Red Bull way. I'm impressed that it's taken 15 years, to be honest. Actually, no, no, even longer, 20 years for them to run out of drivers with how quickly
that's
go
true.
through it, to be honest. There was a period when they first started where they had David Coulthard being their main driver, and then they'd have Scott Speed and Liuzzi, and they were literally swapping them race after race. They were benching them race in, race out, and doing that. It just doesn't work, does it? And, they had an incredible roster. Look at their roster that they've had. Vettel, Jean-Eric Verne, Antonio Felix da Costa, even Kvyat, he was pretty good. Ricardo when he was in his prime. They've had such a strong roster, but they've blown through them.
Yeah.
And now there's nobody left.
Rattled through them. I think that's the thing, isn't it? They've always been after, they were always after the second Vettel. And didn't quite happen. So they churned through drivers while they were looking for the second Sebastian Vettel. And then now they found it. They've got Max Verstappen, who's their world champion. Yeah. And they've now gone, okay, then we need the next Max Verstappen. Whilst Max Verstappen was still 17 years old. So they've been rattling through trying to find the next Verstappen and just putting bullets in heads of drivers. And as you say, if you look at the roster that they've had, just look at the grid today. All of those drivers. So Verstappen was obviously in Red Bull, and is still in Red Bull. Sainz has been there. Perez has been there. Ricardo's been there. Albon's been there. Gasly's been there. Tsunoda's been there. It's just the majority of the grid is Red Bull drivers in one way or another. And they've just churned through all of them.
Yeah, somehow. I don't know. I don't know what they're going to do, though, to get back to that point. I don't think there is much they can do. It is going to go to Ricardo if it's anyone. All right, cool, whatever. I don't think it should be, but I don't know who you put in it. I genuinely don't.
I mean, Ricardo picked up a point today, finished 11th. Obviously, inherits 10th place.
Yeah, he got promoted to 10th, promoted to Red Bull. Not a bad weekend, really, for him.
It's a good weekend of you, Daniel Ricciardo. 2 promotions.
Yeah, got a lot to smile about for once.
And a big smile it is. On that, the final talk, we've kind of gone all the way out. I feel like it's going to be a very long episode. There's been so much to talk about, and I feel like you've come in just the right time, right? Because we're going into the summer break. Final team to talk about in the top 4, Ferrari. We'll be quite quick. There wasn't too much to talk about. Charles Leclerc pole to P4. Generally, I think he did as best as he possibly could. Obviously, inherits that 3rd place position, gets a podium. I think they are still clearly the 4th fastest car on the grid. A stunning qualifying lap from Charles Leclerc, if there's a positive from the weekend. But just, the Ferrari's still not there with the rest of those other kind of big 3 that are in front of them.
No, and if you look in my background, actually, no, you can't really see it, but I've got a lot of Ferrari stuff in my background. Got my Charles Leclerc up there. It was as much as they were going to get. They were never going to win the race. It wasn't realistic that they win. They maximized what they could. Beat McLaren, beat both Red Bulls. To be honest, you could not ask any more from them with Charles Leclerc today. It was a great job that he did. He fell away at the end. The thing that surprised me with Ferrari was they were hard on their tires, which has been their strong point this year, has been their tire wear. And Leclerc especially has been excellent at looking after his tires. It's why he beat Sainz in Spain, for example. But just was not there today. Back end of the race, he boxed at the same... Who did he box at the same time as? Hamilton?
Yeah, I want to say Hamilton. They were all kind of in and around the same, weren't they? That front three, Hamilton, Leclerc, Piastri, kind of, especially the first couple of stints, all looked very similar in terms of pace.
Yeah, but he did that, and usually he's in a better position than them towards the end of the stint, and he just fell away. His tires just dropped off. I don't know if it's because he locked up at some point. But he just fell away today from those drivers at the back end of the race, and there was nothing he could do. Somehow he beat Verstappen. He was helped by the fact Verstappen, I should say, was on mediums, and that probably was his saving grace at the end of the race because the mediums were starting to drop off. Carlos Sainz, he wanted to do a one-stop today. He was thinking about it, but once again, was never gonna work for Sainz like it did for George Russell. When he was on the hard tires.
So you said this before we started, just behind baseball. You said this before you started. Like, I was just listening to the Carlos Sainz interview before we kind of got going, and Carlos Sainz said himself he was frustrated. He started on the hards. He wanted to do a one-stop. He wanted to go super long, but the team forced him to come in around lap 20 when he wanted to pit near a lap 30. And that would have obviously been the inverse of Russell. He would have gone really long on the first stint on the hards, come in mediums for sort of 10 laps, 20 laps, 10, 15 laps towards the end. And you said, well, he just wouldn't have been able to do that. What were you spotting that made you feel like Ferrari actually, they needed to bring Sainz in?
Before Sainz boxed, Hamilton, Leclerc, and a couple of the drivers were all over him. It was game over from there, really. They couldn't keep him out any longer. His pace was just dropping off too quickly. And then even when they put him on the mediums, what did he do? He didn't do many laps on the mediums. He did 7, was it?
Yeah, he did a really short middle stint.
Several seconds to the cars that were around him in that period. He was sinking on those tyres. He was just too hard on the tyres. It was not going to work. I think if they did keep him out for 30-odd laps, he'd have possibly been beaten by Alonso. That might be being a bit harsh. I don't think it might. Maybe that's a bit harsh. But, he'd have been in 8th place as opposed to beating Perez. So, the one-stop wasn't on for Sainz. Ferrari were just too hard on their tyres today in general. It's not a Sainz thing. It's Leclerc and Sainz were too hard on their tyres. Ferrari set up their car to be too hard on their tyres.
Yeah.
It's just the way it is. They were too hard. And that's why they lost pace during the stints this weekend.
Do you think there is any kind of road back for Ferrari? I say, because I think that the thing that's kind of been really interesting throughout the first 14 races, I mean, we can kind of talk about it now because we're going into the mid-season break, is the way that Ferrari definitely started the year as the second fastest, then maybe fell behind the McLaren cars kind of halfway through that. And then sort of 3/4, 2/3 of the way through that have also dropped behind the Mercedes team. And now kind of find themselves in this weird limbo where the drivers are still doing quite well in the driver standings, but are slowly being caught up by the McLarens, being overtaken by Norris now, of course, Piastri getting into the middle of them, the Mercedes drivers kind of getting closer and closer, McLaren overtaking them in the Constructors' Championship. It just feels like that surely they should be able to do what McLaren have done, what Mercedes have done to some extent, and match them, if not beat them, at least be on par for the majority.
Yeah. They're going through bigger changes, though, than McLaren and Mercedes. Mercedes have already gone through the pain of losing a bunch of staff. Ferrari at the minute. I mean, at the beginning of the year, they were building a dream team. With Fred Vasseur and Charles Leclerc, Lewis Hamilton coming on board. There was massive rumors of Adrian Newey is going to do it. He's going to go to Ferrari. He's finally doing it. Italy, by the way, is still a great place for a retirement home. Just saying, Newey, if you want to change your mind, I'd rather go there than somewhere in England. It was looking so good. But since then, they've lost a few engineers. I think their main designer has left to go to is going to be joining Aston Martin. So it's sort of like the wheels have fallen off them a little bit. They've run out of that steam that they had earlier on in the year. I don't know. I really don't know. I don't know. I think they are going to be the fourth fastest team for the rest of the year. Next year, they'll do what they can. They've got two fantastic drivers next year, obviously, with Hamilton and Leclerc. They've got two fantastic drivers now as well. Don't get me wrong, but I don't know what they do. Hamilton, I'm sure, is wishing he could change his contract and just stay at Mercedes.
Maybe.
Go back to Toto. But yeah,
like,
he needs to find himself a good lawyer if he wants to do that, I think.
Might talk about that actually at the end, because I've thrown to a few questions, and I think I've just spotted that one kind of popping up. The whole Hamilton decision making at the beginning of the year looks brilliant. Now, not so. But just to quickly rattle through the rest of the drivers that did finish in the points. Fernando Alonso, we've mentioned a couple of times, just because he finished best of the rest in 9th place. Kind of did the Russell strategy as well. So he did the one stop, managed to make that work in the Aston Martin car. Fairly impressive. I think for Aston Martin, they've just kind of found themselves a little bit like Alpine did last year, where Alpine finished in 6th. They were miles behind the top 5, but well ahead of the bottom 4. I feel like Aston Martin are kind of going to find themselves in that place where they will finish still ahead of RB, Haas, the kind of teams that are hovering below them, but they will finish miles behind the top 4 in 5th spot. So just a bit of a weird half a season for Aston Martin again, really.
Yeah, I don't know what to add to that. There's not really anything to add, is there? It's sort of where they are. They're in no man's land.
Yeah.
I don't even know if Alonso gives a damn at the minute. It's weird that he started off so well as usual, and then he's sort of been beaten by Stroll at a few races, and Aston Martin in general have just dropped.
Yeah.
So I don't know if he's really got his head in it as much as he did, which, look, I don't blame him. It's at the back end of his career, and it started off so strong.
Yeah.
It's just standard of Fernando Alonso's career. It all looked so good, and then it didn't.
I think that's been the thing, hasn't it? You go back 18 months, he starts the season with a podium in Bahrain, does back-to-back on the podium. What was it, like 6 out of the first 7 races or something in 2023?
Like that, yeah. Should have won Monaco that year.
Yeah, and then sort of halfway through last season, it dropped off a bit. Towards the end of last season, it dropped off even more. And then it feels like towards the middle of this season, it's just dropped off even more than that. So it's just continuing to regress from where they were at the beginning of 2023, and they still haven't been able to find any real answers in any direction. Adrian Newey might be that answer. You never know, 2025. Although Honda engines and Fernando Alonso, I've heard, is not a recipe that usually ends up going very well.
Well, they didn't have a good meeting last time, did they? It sort of cost them a win at the Indy 500 as well as the disaster that was McLaren Honda as well. So,
well, let's not bring that up. Esteban Ocon, he finished in the points, finished in 9th place. Another couple of points for Alpine. They've kind of rescued a few points towards the end of this first half of the season. I will get your point, though. How do you feel about Esteban Ocon to Haas?
I honestly don't know. It's a weird one, isn't it? I thought it was pretty weird.
Yeah, me too.
I didn't think it would be who Haas would want to take, but it was being announced for so long that he was going to Haas. I think since... when was he dropped? Was it Monaco?
Yeah, because it was that I think collision with Gasly.
Yeah, after that. But basically, since then, all the way until whatever weekend it was just announced, it was basically saying he's going to Haas, he's going to Haas, he's going to Haas. And I've been struggling to work out who that is. But I think, I'll give him this. He's been in a manufacturer team for a fair few seasons now. Most people don't consider Alpine to be a manufacturer team because they're not a very good team, but they are a manufacturer team. He's got that experience. He is at the back end of his career. I don't see any way forward from where he is.
No.
And he will be a good measuring stick for Behrman. And I guess thankfully for both Behrman and Ocon, it's two very tall drivers, so they don't have to try and compensate for one tall and one small driver. He's got a good amount of experience, so yeah.
I kind of
don't
agree.
know what to add. I genuinely don't know what to add from that.
I think no, I agree. I think it's one of those ones where it's just like it feels like Haas have gone for a very middle of the road driver, almost what they did when they brought in Hülkenberg. They were just looking for a very steady pair of hands, very middle of the road, just will put in good performances the majority of the time. With Hülkenberg, they've kind of had the upside of that, where Hülkenberg has actually started to put in some very, very good performances alongside being very, very consistent. And I think that's what they're maybe hoping for with Esteban Ocon. As you say, I think Ocon has reached his limit potential. He, is a very, very good middle of the road driver. He has really solid 5, 6 out of 10 performances the majority of the time. And then occasionally, I'm thinking like Saudi Arabia, for instance, last year, where he was just absolutely phenomenal. And he does have those few races a year where he just clicks into gear and it just looks like ridiculously quick. I think Ocon is a good enough shout for Haas. Haas obviously very anonymous through this race, but a good season so far for Haas. So I think they can be positive about where they are in the championship standings, especially because I think everybody in their predictions had them 10th. They do.
Yeah, I did.
Did you not? Did you not?
I did. No, I did. I did.
You did. Sorry, I thought you said you did.
Yeah, I did.
I was gonna say.
I think I had them as not a hope in hell.
Yeah.
It's incredible, isn't it, what you can do when you put a competent person in charge of your team. As much as I like Gunter, he just it didn't work. It wasn't really working for him as a team boss. They've got a fantastic Ayo Komatsu is brilliant actual engineer leading the team. It's what they need because they're so limited on their resources versus every other team that they need an engineer to actually steer the team forward. So I think they've maximized what they're going to do this year. This has been the year where they've brought the most upgrades as well. They normally don't do anything until back end of the year and then do one big upgrade, which usually doesn't work for them. But they've actually done steady upgrades, and they have moved somewhat forward. They've maintained where they are.
I think that's the thing. They've at least stood still, which for Haas doesn't normally happen. They usually start the season a little bit stronger and regress, as you said, throughout the season. I'm thinking of Kevin Magnussen coming back in, picking up 5th place in Bahrain, but by the end of the season, the Haas car looked nowhere. And then similar last year, they picked up some good performances at the beginning of the year, and by I think it was Mexico last year, they looked abysmal. And I think everyone was kind of expecting that to reoccur this season, which is why everyone predicted them 10th. But as you say, they managed to find it. They clicked it a little bit. I think it's gutting that they're losing Hülkenberg because I think Hülkenberg was such a good force
they're gonna miss Hülkenberg a lot. I think the thing with Haas in the past has also been they've kind of killed careers before they even were able to get underway. I don't think that'll be the case with Ollie Behrman because I think Ferrari are gonna have a very much more of an input on how his career develops.
It's very much like Charles Leclerc at Alfa Romeo, isn't it? It's Ollie Behrman is there. He is a Haas driver, but Ferrari are going to be in the background shadowing a lot of his.
So no, I think Haas have done a brilliant job this year. I think they're gonna continue this year to they are slowly falling back. We can say that they are, but it's not as aggressive as it's been in the past. They're lucky that VCarb's upgrades have not worked.
True.
I suppose.
Yes.
They're lucky that Alpine started the season so badly. At least they're now on track to, start closing the gap. But they've maximized, like we said, they've maximized their potential. So they've had a good season.
A little bit of dark arts from Kevin Magnussen in there as well, of course. I quite liked that at the beginning of the season. I don't know how you felt about the whole blocking half the field in Saudi Arabia and picking up template, or what was it, 20 seconds worth of penalties, but not really serving it so that you can make sure that Hulkenberg still finishes.
Yeah, it's the reason why I sometimes wish F1 brought back drive-through penalties as opposed to 10-second time penalties or 5. I'm glad that they've increased it from 5 to 10 because I think 5-second penalties are a joke. I think of what was the ones last year, Las Vegas, where Verstappen pushed Leclerc straight off at the start, got a 5-second penalty. Who cares? I'm going to fly by him anyway. So I think 5 seconds is not really stringent enough. 10 seconds is decent. I do wish they brought back drive-throughs, though. And the reason I wish they brought back drive-throughs, which would have stopped that for Kevin Magnussen. I thought he did everything within the rules, so fair play to him. But one of the reasons I wish they brought back drive-throughs is because not only would it have stopped that, but if a driver gets a drive-through penalty, it means they've got to come back through the field. If it's a front driver, it opens the race up a lot more, so you get the less of the same results. Not that we're getting the same results anymore, but, if we were, at least that stops that. I think Magnussen did fine. It was within the rules that they allow for, so...
Allowed, nonetheless. Final two teams we haven't mentioned. Alex Albon looked like he was on for points, just about fell away in this one. Again, I feel like Williams, of all the teams, need the summer break the most. They look absolutely exhausted. Just as a team, as an outfit, just everything right now looks very slow and cumbersome. And they don't... I think it goes all the way back to the beginning of the season, where they had, the big crash in Australia, the big crash again in Japan. They were flying chassis back to the UK, back to Asia, back to the UK, back to Asia. And it was just everything was going wrong for them after what was already a horrendous winter for them, where they tried to recalibrate everything. They look exhausted. They need a rest. I'm glad Alex Albon's got a couple of weeks off. He looks so done and dusted with it. And then finally, Valtteri Bottas also was running in the points. Looked like he was going to go for that kind of Alonso strategy, George Russell strategy at one point. Didn't quite make it work. I don't think the Stake Sauber has that in its abilities yet as a car. Running towards the back end of the grid, fell towards 16th. Go another DNF, an issue at the start, then looked like it was fixed, then wasn't fixed. So it's just let's just bring that back in.
Sauber. It's a weird one, isn't it, with them?
I always find it's hard to talk about them because you know that they're a team just treading water.
Yeah, they're just there. Which is a shame because, Sauber had one really good race this year. And I think a lot of people don't actually talk about it. And that was the Chinese Grand Prix, where Bottas was in the points, on pace, and then Sauber had a slow pit stop, and then his engine blew up. And that is just, they've not recovered.
That is quintessential Sauber this season.
Yes,
the pit stops are slow, the car does not work. Which is, as I say, I feel like I find it really hard to talk about them in any sort of fashion because whenever anyone brings them up, it's only to talk about Audi. You never actually hear anybody talking about kick or stake or however you want to call them now. Nobody cares about the now. No. It's always there's news about Audi. So everyone is focused on 2026. And if it's like that for everyone outside of the corporation, it's probably like that for everyone inside as well. So they are looking at 2026 as their one sole focus at this point. And
what do you think about Binotto?
I've got that on my list. Well, the fact that Seidel is out, I think is very interesting. You know, he was brought on for an Audi project. They haven't even got an Audi car onto the grid yet, and he's been ditched out of the team. Like,
Yeah.
that does not bode well, I would say.
No.
And the fact that they've, hit the Bonotto button, brought him in as a little bit of a, we've got a year left, or a year and 10 races left until we're on the grid. It doesn't feel like it's going as well as they were hoping it to. They haven't been able to sign Carlos Sainz, who was like their clear number one target. Doesn't look like they're going to be able to sign Carlos Sainz either.
No.
I think everyone is very, very hyped about Audi, and for good reason. I do think they'll be good eventually. I think 2026 is not going to be, them coming into the sport and finishing 5th. I think they're going to come into the sport, they're going to finish 8th, 9th, 10th, and it is going to be a slow building process from there.
Yeah. Do you know about the Toyota F1 project, how that was in the early 2000s?
Yes.
That's Audi.
Oh, you're getting that vibe, are you? They're just throwing billions at it.
Well, they'll throw as much as they can because there is a cost cap actually on the power units. But
as
what
I
I
mean,
mean
they built
by
the
that,
factory and the facilities, haven't they? They've built like a huge Formula One park in the Audi area.
Essentially, what I meant by that though is they're not going to do anything, and then they're going to leave. It's the Audi way. No, I don't see any.
That's a tasty hot take.
How many rumors have we already heard that Audi's has considered pulling the plug, and then they go no, and now they're having a big restructure. It's 18 months before they're set to join the grid. They're going to make the grid. I don't think they're going to pull out. Audi is going to be on the grid in 26. Will they be there by 2030? I don't think they will. I can see them having a bad run and quitting. And that's just because of how bad, not how bad, how it's more to do with how VW Group has been towards F1 for my entire life. I've watched F1 for my entire life, and for the entirety of it, it's always talk about how Audi or Porsche are gonna join the grid. They get there, they don't get there. They just always they push it a little bit further along each time, and then quit. And I don't think they're going to be competitive. I think they're going to get a shock to the system. And I'll be surprised if they're there for more than 4 years and they don't sell up.
I like it. I do like it as a take. You've got a great point. It would be very, very interesting to see how that goes.
But I do think Bonotto is a positive for the team.
I do as well. I think losing Seidel. I think Seidel was. I did really like Seidel when he was at McLaren because he did take us through the first phase of kind of putting things back together. Before Seidel, it was atrocious. At least under Seidel, we had those years with Carlos Sainz and Lando Norris, and there was a little bit of positivity. We were at least in the midfield. We were maybe battling for 5th or 6th in the constructor standings, and there was that first positive step. But since then, we've kind of seen how Andrea Stella has just taken that and run with it to the moon. It's just completely changed the way that McLaren is set up, completely changed the infrastructure that was put in place by Seidel, and now we're reaping the rewards of Andrea Stella coming in and doing that. So I agree. I think Bonotto is better for them than Seidel. Whether Bonotto on his own is going to be able to do enough, as you say, it's a long way to go.
Yeah, with Bonotto, I have a feeling they've brought him in because he is an engine guy.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of rumors going around that the Audi engine is not good. And that's one of the big negatives for Carlos Sainz joining, is because the Audi power unit is not going to be there where they want it to be, which makes sense. They're not on the grid right now. They're not reaping any rewards because the power unit changes, they're drastic, but they're not as drastic as I think as the V6 introduction was. It's nowhere near as drastic as that. Because they've still got a V6 engine. The ICE is still the same. The MGU-K is a hell of a lot more powerful, but a lot of the things are still somewhat similar to how it was. I'm pretty sure like the fuel flow rate's not really changing that much. The fuel that they get for the race is how it's used is changing, but so they're not really as much of a factor. So they're already missing out on that amount of development. So yeah, I think they are going to be behind on their power unit, and we already know the chassis is atrocious. So
it's not going well for them at the moment.
No,
that's what I mean. There's a very, very long way to go for that Audi project to really click into gear. We have gone on a little bit, but I will throw in some community questions for you. Put out a little post, ask for people's opinions on the race, and if they had any questions for yourself. Let's have a quick gander. This win from George Russell was better than his at Interlagos. I mean, you did say that. But unfortunate timing. It probably was his best win in a Mercedes car.
It's his best win in F1. It was a bloody incredible drive.
Yeah, but just unfortunately taken it away from him. Feel like Sainz has had a really bad strategy. He should have extended at the start, stopped on mediums. We kind of talked about that. Although they have brought up the fact, Carlos Sainz still not signed to a team. I didn't get your opinion on that. Where do you think he should go? There's still 5 spots available for him. Mercedes seat, Kimi Antonelli probably taken. So you're looking at like Alpine, Williams, or that Steak Sauber / Audi seat.
Yeah. If Carlos Sainz Sr. has any pull game in that Red Bull seat, but he's not going to Red Bull. I'd love for him to go to Red Bull. He should be in the Red Bull. He's the driver that should be replacing Perez. But he's not. Where does he end up? Like, what's the best of a bad bunch is what's left, because he's not getting Mercedes, because that is going to Kimi Antonelli, who is getting better and better with every passing F2
so
race.
Good. Yeah, I've been
doing
really
something
impressed
phenomenal
with him.
each weekend. So what's left? Alpine. Renault doesn't even care about them anymore. Like, they're pulling the plug, so who cares? Like, all right.
Do you not think Alpine with the Mercedes engine? That's the rumor.
Yeah. I spoke to one of my friends, one of my other friends, and he said Alpine's the most uninspiring team on the grid at the minute.
I mean, yeah, he's not wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, haven't they? Oh, actually, on that, Bruno Firmin, he's out. So another team boss gone at Alpine. So yeah, actually. Yeah.
Well, he gutted the team and did nothing with it. So
yeah,
good riddance to bad vermin, or whatever the saying is. Yeah, Alpine's probably the best prospect of the 3, even though I've just called them uninspiring. They are the best prospect of the 3. Williams are in a rebuilding phase. Sauber, I've just decimated them for the last 10 minutes, so there's no point. Yeah, Alpine's probably the best bet for the short term. Long term, if Audi does get it right and they do get on top of things, they probably would be the best one. But does Carlos want to go through 3 years of pain and misery to get on the other side? His fellow Spaniard did it and didn't enjoy it. No. So, Alpine. If there's anywhere he's going to go, he's going to go to the most uninspiring team on the grid. That is Alpine.
Fair enough, yeah. I can see Alpine happening, to be honest with you. I think the rumor was Williams, but it has sort of started to lean more towards him going to Alpine. I think there's still quite a way to go before Carlos Sainz actually picks, to be honest with you. Amisap says, Lewis leaving Mercedes this season might struggle in Ferrari. Hopefully not, as a Ferrari fan. And Claire also wants to ask you, I think because you're a Ferrari fan, a lot of Ferrari questions coming in. Do you think Lewis will regret moving to Ferrari given Mercedes' strong performances in recent weeks?
Well, I've already said he's probably looking right now for the best lawyers I can find to get out of his contract and re-sign with Mercedes. One for Team LH. If you think Mercedes strategies are bad, you've got another thing coming next year. I think it's a great place, I think, for him to end his career. He always wants to drive for Ferrari. Every driver does, whether they say they do or don't. Pretty much everyone does. They're giving him the ambassador role for the team, which is something Mercedes weren't willing to do.
Yeah.
So outside of the driving the car bit, there's probably a lot of good things for him. I know, obviously, with Mission 44 as well, that's going to be a big impact on Ferrari, who I believe are the only team that are not involved with it, or they are, but don't really get involved as much as others. So that'll probably increase, which I know is a big thing for him. So for those, it's going to be a positive. But in terms of driving for Ferrari, yeah, he's probably going to wish he was still at Mercedes.
At least for 2025. I don't know, 2026?
25.
2026?
26?
Hopeful?
Isn't the rumor is that Mercedes are in a very good position, so we'll see.
Yeah, but Ferrari, they've also got I feel like Ferrari moving into a new rules regulation are always one of the teams you have an eye on.
You got to keep an eye on. You always keep an eye on Ferrari, regardless of what happens.
Started this rules regulation cycle second. Started this season second. Can very quickly change with Ferrari. Final question for you then, and I think Leflouf going for the jugular a little bit. Which team do you think will get the most wins in the last half of the season? 10 races. You had to kind of split the 10 races between, I'm assuming, 4 teams. How would you see that going?
Next race is Zandvoort, isn't it?
It is indeed.
Should be McLaren. High downforce circuit. A lot of elevation change. Got to ride some curbs. There's a lot of bumps in the circuit. It's one of the bumpier circuits of the season. Should be a very good race for McLaren. Monza after that. Ferrari always does have always does well at Monza, because I think they tend to go for the more low downforce. They actually have a Monza package more so than other teams, because they kind of need to, because they're a national embarrassment if they don't win at Monza for some reason. So they're going to be strong there. McLaren won't be as strong at Monza, but Mercedes, oh god, Monza, I'm going to go Mercedes. Monza's Mercedes, Zandvoort is McLaren. What's after that? Singapore?
Azerbaijan,
bloody hell. I forgot it's that far in the season. I'm not used to it being so late. Leclerc will get pole because he's very good at getting pole there, but it should be a good fight between Ferrari and McLaren, that circuit.
You haven't mentioned Red Bull at all yet. Singapore?
No, I haven't. Singapore should be another good one between McLaren and Ferrari. So we'll say McLaren should win 3 of the next 5 races. Should.
Yeah. And then the US, Mexico, Brazil, Vegas, Qatar.
Right, okay. One for Red Bull, Mexico. The Honda power unit at high altitude is on another level to every other team, and it still will be this year. So they're going to be okay. There's a reason why Ricciardo was so good at Mexico last year, and it's not because he's very good at Mexico. It's because the Honda engine is so good at altitude that it doesn't lose the same amount of performance as other teams. So Red Bull can win Mexico. Maybe bring back Perez after you've benched him.
Just for one race.
Yeah. What's after? Circuit of the Americas.
Circuit of the Americas.
A very bumpy circuit, historically. So it depends if they've resurfaced it, because I know they do typically resurface it every few years. If they have done, Red Bull should be in a good position there, because it's such a fast-flowing circuit that should suit their car nicely. But if it is bumpy, then they are going to be under threat, probably from Mercedes there. Interlagos should be another one that's a good one for Red Bull, because it is high altitude. But again, they need to ride the bumps and the curbs, which is an issue for them. So I'm going to go for Mercedes on that one as well. Qatar should be Red Bull.
Vegas.
Oh, Vegas, yeah. I hate Vegas. Actually, it was a great race. It was a very good race. I don't know.
We've only had it once.
Yeah, and it was a fantastic race, and I still hate it. Vegas. Depends what the weather's doing. You can't. It was supposed to be like 5 degrees last year, and it wasn't. So we'll see what the weather's doing in the evening there.
And then Abu Dhabi.
I'll give Red Bull that one.
Oh, you're going to give Red Bull. But, and then Abu Dhabi.
Red Bull.
Yeah.
So I've given Red Bull 3 or 4 wins.
Yeah, you gave Red Bull Mexico, US, Las Vegas, Abu Dhabi. You gave McLaren 3 of the next 5.
Yeah.
As a McLaren fan,
they should.
Scratch
they
my
should.
head.
Whether or not they will, I don't know, but they should.
McLaren probably should have won the 3 of the last 5.
Well, yeah, fair point. All right, Mercedes are going to win them as well.
We have not. So. Yeah, racing is epic. Literally in the chat, 3 of the last 5 wins for McLaren probably, but it's gone to Mercedes. So maybe it should just be Mercedes who get those ones in the end.
Yeah, maybe. Hindsight's a wonderful thing.
No, I think that's a pretty good rundown. I like it. Put your money where your mouth is. There you go. If you want like a,
I will do. You'll see them on my video.
Can you do an ACCA? £1, 10 races. Yep. See how it goes. Nah, thank you so much for joining me, mate. I think this has been one of the longer ones because I've just enjoyed bouncing off of you so much. You got so much like detail in terms of the insight. I think because of your like pre-race stuff, giving it away a little bit. I watch all of your pre-race stuff before I do the live streams because then I feel like it's in my head before I go into the live stream, and because you can give me the rundown, I can be like, I think McLaren are going to do this. It's usually your opinion that I'm going off of.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I appreciate that because I usually forget about everything that I talk about. So I'm glad at least one of us knows what I'm on about because I don't most of the time.
Nah, thank you for joining us. Where can we find you? Obviously, the Mr. Pulse YouTube channel. I will link it down in the description.
The main one, yep, the Mr. Pulse YouTube channel. I basically do preview and predictions for every single race. I think I've done it ever since the 2022 United States Grand Prix. So I've sat through the Verstappen era. Great time to start. But yeah, I've been doing preview and predictions for pretty much now nearly 2 years. And I also do practice data analysis. So look at everything that happened on Friday for FP1 and mainly FP2 because FP1's a bit of a waste of time. And then qualifying data analysis. So I'll go through qualifying, basically do a comparison mainly between where drivers lost out. So usually, for example, for Ferrari, I'm always comparing Leclerc and Sainz because they're always together on track. There's nothing to separate between them. So I try to look at where it is, where if one driver beats another one, how did they do it? Where did they find the time? Where did they lose the time? For example, this weekend, I mainly looked at how Red Bull obliterated everyone in qualifying in Sector 2 because they had more downforce, and Verstappen through Puon corner was an absolute weapon. But yeah, basically I do that, do a lot of data analysis and preview and predictions, and I do a lot of waffling in general, as you probably gathered for the last hour and a half. So yeah, you can find me on YouTube.
Massively appreciate it, mate. Really, really have enjoyed having you on the channel. If you are new here, hit that like button, subscribe button, all of that good stuff. And yeah, now a little bit of a summer break for us both. The teams will be back in action in Zandvoort in 4 weeks' time. And honestly, after the last 5 races, I cannot wait. It's going to be absolutely amazing. We will see you then.
Yep, we will do.